Welcome to the 1958 Lawyer, the show for attorneys who know the old model isn't working anymore. The billable hour, the 12-hour day, the expensive office no one visits. Your hosts, Ron Boxstaller and Clinton Ind, are here to question all of that and more by exploring smarter, healthier, more flexible ways to run a law firm. No more burnout, no more outdated expectations, just real conversations with attorneys who are proving there's a better way. If you're ready to build a law firm that's profitable and livable, you're in the right place. Now here are your hosts, Ron and Clinton.
Welcome to the 1958 Lawyer, the podcast about the business of law. I'm your host, Ron Boxstaller, along with my partner, Clinton Ind. Hey, yeah. In 1958, the ABA published an article that sparked the birth of the billable hour, and the legal profession hasn't looked back since. This show is about what comes next. Each episode, we sit down with attorneys, business leaders, and the people who support them to talk honestly about what it takes to build a law practice that's not just successful, but sustainable. All right, let's get into it, Clint. We got an amazing guest today. Very excited. Katy Mickelson. I've known Katy for several years, but I really didn't know much about Katy until I did a little research for this show. Katy Mickelson, a family law equity partner at Bierman LLP, where she has worked for nearly 2 decades, making her the only partner at the firm who started there as a law clerk. We got to bring that up and talk about that. A University of Michigan undergrad and Chicago Kent College of Law grad. She has earned mediation certification during law school. Before law, she spent 7 years as a public relations executive. International experience, studied EU law in Italy, and worked in IP law in Beijing. Named one of Law Bulletin's 40 under 40 Illinois attorneys to watch in 2012. Super Lawyers honoree 21 through 25. AVO Client's Choice Award winner, featured in Crane's Chicago Business. I read that article too. That was a wonderful article. Notable woman lawyers. Lives in Park Ridge with their husband, 2 children, and an English Mastiff.
Actually, correction, we have 2 dogs now.
So. 2 dogs now. All right.
Sucker. You're a sucker,
yeah.
Katy.
Yeah.
Let me throw a philanthropy chair for the Women's Network of Make-A-Wish. Katy, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Lot of things to say. You've done so many things, and you did it maybe not a non-traditional as you were going through your career to get to where you're at today. So let's jump right into it. You spent 7 years as a public relations executive before you ever set foot in the law school classroom. What happened? Was there a moment where you said, I need to be a lawyer, or was this like a slow burn?
It's an interesting question because when I left my undergraduate training, so I went to University of Michigan, go Blue, and
you got to start vetting out these Big Tens.
It's not okay.
Yeah,
you're not allowed to say that stuff on this. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. So as a sociology major, all of us do things as undergrad. There's like a pointless undergrad, but I always, you think about it now, just do whatever you want, explore yourself, like whatever it is that you want to do. You might not be able to use it, but have fun. Like every probably young 20-something, the idea of communications and PR and all that kind of stuff was really fun and kind of sexy. I mean, you want to do cool stuff, right? Like, so I had worked in agencies and just was super interested in the writing aspect of it and a lot of what I did was working with consumer products, and you'd come up with these really creative media campaigns and spokespeople, and I did some really cool things, like some represented had a client Breathe Right nasal strips, and I went to the Super Bowl with Jerry Rice, and
that is cool.
Went and did the world's largest gathering of identical twins in Twinsburg, Ohio, for Doublemint gum. I mean, that kind of stuff was cool, and it was like fun, and you're in your 20s and you burn the midnight oil, you're like up all night doing all that stuff. And then but I kind of had this realization at some point that I was so, you get really stressed, of course, in any job. And I'm like stressed about like toilet paper, because like that was like my level of stress. And I'm like, this feels kind of not what I meant to do long term. And, I come from a family of lawyers. My dad is retired, but he practiced law in transactional side of it in real estate for a very long time. But like so many lawyers in my family, and I think he thought of all the, I have two other siblings, of all the kids, I probably would be very well suited to be a lawyer. So I was 29 and it was kind of a now or never thing. So I thought, okay, well, I'm not married, I don't have children, I don't really have anything that's holding me back. I can kind of make a decision for myself. So I just decided to quit my job and become a full-time student, which was kind of strange given the fact that most people go right from law school.
Yeah.
Or excuse me, college to law school. And I was one of the older students, and it was a big reality check.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I was 26 when I started, not quite 29, but it's a weird thing, right? Being in the classroom with a bunch of 21, 22-year-olds.
It is, and it feels very, I don't know, it just doesn't feel very real world. When you've been dealing with companies and businesses and things that don't require grades, law school was kind of like a big wake up call of what I needed to do. But it was something I had to do. Was, I wasn't able to get, you can't be a lawyer without going to law school or passing the bar. So I had no choice. But, I wasn't like, a lot of people left undergrad and they said, I'm going to be a lawyer. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be a lawyer, but I got to do it now if I'm going to make a decision about being a lawyer.
Well, let's talk about it. You went into law school with 7 years of communication PR experience that most of your peers, probably none of your peers had. How much of your success as a litigator do you actually trace back to those years while prior to going to law school?
I think I call on my prior career all the time. I mean, because especially being in family law, there's such an emphasis on effective communication. And you've got a lot of audiences. So you have your clients, you have opposing counsel. If you're a litigator, you have judges. I question all the time, do we have jury trials? No. There are some states that do jury trials for certain issues in family law, but Illinois is not one of them. But you've got a judge, and you're always being a storyteller. So you have to be really good at communicating and doing it in a way that people understand you. So a lot of what PR was is we were taking these concepts and trying to relate it to somebody on a real human basis so that they would either buy or they would do a service or they, and you would do it in creative ways to keep them engaged. And so a lot of what I do, you want to keep your judge engaged. You want to capture the attention of prospective clients. I mean, and Ron, because we do a lot of, work in the business development space together, that connection with potential referral sources is huge too. Mm-hmm. So you have to be personable and, somebody likes, just like in PR, you got to like the product or service. It's just something that you want to, causes you to buy in that sense.
You a little unusual. I think it's unusual anyway, that you're both a litigator and a certified mediator. You got the mediation cert during law school, I believe, correct?
Yeah. So there was a track in law school where you could do alternative dispute resolution. And so as part of that program, you would get certified. So I got certified through the Center for Conflict. I've actually been certified twice through the Center for Conflict Resolution. And then I started a collaborative law training, which I did not finish, but as part of that, there was another 40-hour mediation training that I did. So I did that. And it's so useful in the litigation practice because I can say to clients, or I can switch gears. So a mediation mindset's a very different mindset than a litigation mindset. And a lot of litigators because in Illinois and in Cook County and a lot of our counties, you have to go to mediation on certain issues before you litigate. And it's very interesting seeing the attorneys that really aren't mediators. They're pure litigators. And they don't really think about the fact there's no judge that they're trying to impress. And, the mediator is a neutral. So you have to be, not only do you have to adjust how you represent a client and how you interact, you have to also be much more creative, because you don't have a judge who's going to be really following and bound to the law. You're actually within the parameters of the law allowed to be creative. So there's like some skills that you really need. So I think it's really useful to have that. Plus, my clients don't feel like they have to like switch counsel. So in the event mediation isn't successful, then they just have me,
Is that a thing? Are you able to do that? If you're a mediator and then, yeah.
Well, so I don't, I'm doing, let me clarify, I'm doing a lot of attorney assisted mediation where I'm advocating for a client on a particular side. I like that. I like that advocacy role versus being the actual mediator for the case. However, there are certain, like in the collaborative law arm of family law, if you are a collaboratively trained lawyer and you take a case in a collaborative sense, you are not able to then take a case to litigation if the collaborative process fails.
Gotcha.
When you do mediation, which is a private process, that same attorney who works with you in the mediation setting can also then be with you in the litigation setting as well.
Gotcha. You need to educate me a little. So you might have an attorney that only does mediation. So if mediation fails, they have to go to trial. They have to seek out a different counsel.
There have been occasions where somebody says, I don't, it is becoming more popular these days to basically forgo litigation. And I'm sure you've seen or heard of people saying, I don't litigate. I don't touch it because I do not blame those people, because I think litigation can be very, very dangerous, tough, and it's really you're never going to get your day in court as you think you might. So
it's taxing too. Do you think it's really taxing on everybody, attorneys as well? Yeah.
It's taxing from an emotional and financial, there's a lot of different perspectives that it's taxing. But there is a place for it, because there are times when you need somebody to call balls and strikes. And in such a emotion-driven profession, principle ends up being a very powerful thing. And principle is very expensive. Let's just say it that way. It can be very expensive and not very satisfying.
I remember when I started Amada 24 years ago, one of our first attorneys, Spence Marks, never forget it. Ron, principle is very expensive. Are you sure you want to go that route? But I know I'm right. That's really not the point here.
Yeah, exactly. There's an old saying that it says, the moment that you walk into a courtroom, you've lost.
Yeah.
There is a lot of truth to that. Just unfortunately, there are some cases where they just can't figure it out on their own. The problem is that you've got a judge who's a human being who makes mistakes and who doesn't know your family from the other hundreds of cases that are on, his or her docket each day. So is it a good solution? It's sometimes it's a necessary solution, but it's not necessarily a good solution.
Yeah. Yeah, the principle, I would imagine when I hear, having never practiced family law, when I hear you talking about principle and family law, I immediately think you've got one side who just wants to hurt the other side for whatever reason because of the emotion attached to whatever is happening, which I think if that's the case of the principle that you have to deal with in litigation, that's really particularly taxing, I would think.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. It is. Yeah.
Let's go a little bit back to your journey. You're the only equity partner at Bierman who started there as a law clerk and rose all the way up. That's a remarkable arc.
I actually want to clarify that because we do have a new equity partner who I would now have to qualify that as the only female.
Can we
say
you're the first? Yeah.
I am the first, actually. That's a good qualification. Yes.
What does it actually take to go from the bottom of the organizational chart to the equity partner at the same firm?
A lot of hours. No, a lot of time. You said that I've been, practicing almost 2 decades. I've been practicing actually over 2 decades. I started there really by chance. It was not I was looking for a clerking position, and I happened to have a connection, which is oftentimes the way people get into firms. And at that time, the firm was multidisciplinary. So we had lots of different areas. They needed somebody, and it was, it was a different time. Again, it was very casual. I just came in, and that time I have to say, I remember I was wearing overalls. I don't know who wears overalls. But I remember specifically what I was wearing. I was wearing overalls, and I went to an interview. So it was not this formal thing. I went in, I was able to get the position, which is funny now because I hire law clerks now, and I cannot imagine somebody coming to an interview in overalls. But that being said,
would they get hired if somebody walked in that you were?
If they had the audacity to wear overalls,
right,
I might say to them, you know what, I like your style.
Right.
But, and I'll talk a little bit about, how I go about trying to mentor and suggesting that people work for the firm. But, so I found a place, and then I stayed, and then I stayed, and then I, stayed longer and longer and longer. And I worked my way up, and I started in the smallest, tiniest little office, and I worked on everything. And then I got hired as an associate attorney, and I just, it fit for me. The type of law, the skills, all that kind of stuff just fit. And, years later, I've seen the firm evolve. We've acquired, and merged with other firms. We have it eliminated, and, sounds so harsh, but we've gotten rid of the other practice groups. And now we're at least 56 attorneys. I have to go back and count my website, but doing just family law. So we're the largest in Illinois, and then I would say the country, although that fact has to be checked because we have looked, and I think there is one law firm that does family law that has almost like franchises.
Okay.
But I mean, if you were to look at just an office, that would be us. And so, I don't know, lots of late nights, lots of grumblings, lots of mistakes, learnings, tears, happiness. It's a long haul. So I started in 2004, and now it's 2026, and here I am.
Been a great journey.
Still plugging. Yeah.
A lot of attorneys listening to the show, they think family law is totally separate from business law, but you handle a lot of high net worth divorces, business owner divorces, prenups, protecting significant assets. Where does family law end and business law begin, and why should every business owning attorney care about that?
So what's interesting about family law is it's one of those areas of law that touches actually so many different areas of law. So, the family law attorney doesn't necessarily have to have a knowledge base of business law, corporate transactions, business litigation. But we do need to have a fundamental understanding, and we need to know people who are better at doing that than we are. So I'm never going to hold myself out as a business law attorney or a real estate transactional attorney or a criminal law attorney or bankruptcy or anything that, my clients potentially could need, hopefully not bankruptcy, but, in the process. And so given the fact of who my typical client is going to be a business owner, somebody who will have an interest in a business that hopefully, whether there's going to be some kind of liquidity event or something that's going to happen, or somebody who's a C-suite executive or a spouse of that person, because, I'm not only I'm representing, either side if the fit is correct. You have to have both an understanding from a term standpoint, and also just a sophistication about, what a business owner, for example, is going through, what the things are that they're thinking about. And as I referenced before, having the connections within the legal industry and then outside the legal industry of all the professions that touch on the things that a business owner would need is essential. Because it is not an ego-driven I can't do what I do with ego. It has to be, I have to have some humility regarding what I don't know, and work with other individuals who can, make me seem really smart. But it's really kind of there. It's there. Yeah.
I think you're being modest.
Yeah.
You draft a lot of prenup agreements. You work with the high net worth. I think it's a big part of your business. Convincing someone who's madly in love, I mean, like myself, that they need to, sign a prenup before they get divorced. And then they say, no, I'm not going to do it. Have you ever had a situation where they come back and said, man, I wish I would have done that, but now I need you because I'm screwed?
Well, yeah, I mean, prenup conversations are tough conversations to have. I actually wrote an article on parents actually talking to their adult children about their adult children getting prenups when they get married. It's also kind of a sticky conversation, right? I want to say, has somebody come to me and said, man, you told me to enter a prenup. I didn't. And look where I am now. That hasn't happened as much as somebody saying, I didn't enter into one and I should have, and here's where I am now. I think I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a really tough conversation, but I do think it's a practical one. If you're married, which I am, you are, and Clint, I don't know if you are, it's
And without a prenup.
Wait, to another attorney with 4 kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's marriage is not all roses. We all know that.
Okay? Yeah. What?
Yeah.
And I know.
Ron's is.
It is. I mean, it's based on love and romance and so forth, and parts of it. But it's a business relationship. You are bringing together your finances. You're making financial decisions. You're, obviously making decisions about your kids if you have them, and just like what does your future look like? And so that's like running a business. You're kind of figuring out what it is that's going to look like financial in the future. So if you wouldn't start a business without a business plan, you wouldn't, you get insurance, you get car insurance and health insurance because you're kind of betting and you're hoping nothing bad happens, but you buy it because you have a realistic understanding of what life could have in store.
Yeah.
So
I can see that being a tough conversation to have with people who are doughy-eyed in love.
It is a tough conversation. Yeah. Because generally the ones who are having the toughest conversation are the first-time married people. Mm. Second-time married people, it's a little bit easier to have that conversation because if they've gone through a divorce process, they know it can be tough in getting a divorce, and if you kind of leave it open without a prenup. It's the ones who've never been married before because they're looking at it from a perspective of romance,
What do you need a contingency on something that's going to last forever?
Yeah.
You don't need that. Yeah.
Right. It doesn't help that I have the statistic that 50% of Americans want a divorce, but they don't want to hear that. But it's a tough conversation to have, and you have to tread it carefully. I don't think you have to have a ton of money to have a prenup. It actually, the point of a prenup being, I'm going to define my rights now in the event of a divorce. I'm going to define what a division of my estate looks like. I'm going to define whether I have to pay spousal support or, to the other spouse. I mean, there are going to be things that a prenup's not going to cover. So say you do go down the divorce route and you have children, prenup is not going to cover anything related to your kids, financial or otherwise. So yeah. Good news is you can litigate something else, but
right.
The point is, yeah.
So I think it's rare. Most of the people, I've been an attorney for 20 years, and I don't know if I've ever come across anybody else who has been in the same practice area for the entirety of their career. And you seem to still love it. So what is the thing about practicing family law in particular that you particularly like, that keeps you going?
It's never, the issues are always novel. So I'm not reviewing the same contract. I'm not, litigating the same type of business dispute, which I would argue probably there's never a business dispute that's the same.
Yeah.
But the players always change. The issues are always new. Keeps me on my toes. I've been at this, and what you say for, a lot of people have not left their industry. A lot of people, or most people have maybe switched industries within the legal field. Not a lot of people have stayed at the same firm. I know that it's more, people will leave and go to different firms. And I think it is pretty rare for somebody to stay at a firm long-term these days. Probably was less uncommon before, but I think like firm hopping is a pretty common thing. It's just, if you've got some, if something's, not broke, what do you need to fix? And it's, I will say this, I say this to younger attorneys all the time. You're never going to find a perfect workplace. You'll never find it. It doesn't exist. There's always going to be something that is challenging. But then you have to decide, what am I going to prioritize? And what am I going to make work? What am I going to look past? What am I going to say, this is just a mere annoyance, but then the big picture of everything that I have makes it worth it to stay.
Yeah.
There are aspects of family law that are really tough. I'm not going to, pretend it's not. But I wouldn't be doing anything else than what I'm doing.
Yeah. This place you find yourself where you're rolling with the punches, so to speak, is also a rarity. So maybe that's the best lesson that anybody can take out of this podcast, is just being able to appreciate the ups and downs and still be able to roll with it. I think that is the biggest rarity that I'm getting from you, actually. I give that as a compliment, 100%.
Yeah, thanks.
Let's lighten this up a little bit before we go further. You studied EU law in Italy, worked in IP law in Beijing. You live in Park Ridge with an English Mastiff and a
miniature English cream box.
Just give us a little story about
you
the
just
journey.
Combined a lot of different things.
Yeah, give some highlights.
I don't see enough hair in the background of your office.
Give us some highlights of you've done a lot, and it's amazing. I have done a lot. So we just want to get we want to know, Katy.
Okay, so my philosophy is I never want to be somebody who later on in life says, "What if?" I want to do it. I do it. The way you just described it exhausted me, just the way that you said that. But it's funny because, I've been on this earth for a long time, so I better, have done something with it. We were talking about earlier when I was in undergraduate, which I don't think at that time when we were an undergraduate studying abroad was that, I just don't remember it being such a thing. So when I went to law school, I was like, darn it, I'm going to just do everything. So I went, in between my first and second year, I went to Italy, to Siena, and studied through a Tulane sponsored program. And it was European Union law and regulations. And who doesn't want to be in Siena, Italy?
Right.
Staying in a monastery. Then between my second and my third year, prior to starting at Bierman as a law clerk, I went to Beijing, and I had an opportunity to work in an intellectual property firm in the suburbs of Beijing. And so I would take the subway in every day. And, everyone says, tell me what your experience was like in China. And if you've gone to China before, it's like nothing that you can really describe and compare. Like you can't. Now, this was back in the early 2000s. I'm sure many things have changed prior to the Olympics going and so forth. So it was, there's probably many differences now, but it was an experience. And, I kind of got a lot of that stuff out of my system. I still travel a lot. I still try to do as much as I can from a perspective of enriching myself, so now instead of living in Beijing, I travel with my family, or I'm a fellow of the International Academy of Family Lawyers. So I go on amazing trips. I was just in Kenya in the fall. And I have many more to do. So I really try to make time for things that interest me. So travel really interests me. Of course, my family, I hope, interests me. I would hope so. I'm a big dog lover. So yes, I have a big English Mastiff, Archie, and I convinced my husband to get a second dog. So I had to have something that I felt like imagery wise looked good. So I ended up getting a miniature English cream dachshund who's like he looks like a really low to the ground, long golden retriever.
Oh,
And
I've seen those. Yeah, those are cool looking. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's 15 pounds. Archie's 110.
Right.
And, he sits on top of Archie, like he sits on him so he can look out the window. And Archie's just like, okay. And my little guy's name is Gus. And I mean, the two of them are total buddies. And yeah, so we have, I got this house for dogs. Let's just say it.
All
that way.
right. We might have to get a picture of that and put it on the show notes.
Yes, I'm happy to do that.
We're kind of going to wind this down. This show is built on the idea that the billable hour is the last big structural change to the business of law back in 1958. Family law feels like one of the areas most ripe for reinvention with AI, online mediation, flat fee models, self-represented litigants. What does family law look like in 10 years, and what do you hope never changes?
Well, I think there's going to be more of an emphasis on not going to court. So I think there's been some interesting changes to family law. So, COVID changed a lot. It really exposed, I think, the inefficiencies of the court system from a lot of different perspectives. When we used to go to court pre-COVID days, I would spend all of my mornings at the courthouse. Mm-hmm. And you would go and you would, we would have a cattle call of cases, and you would have to wait for your case being called, but you would end up to be in the courthouse, which was mostly at the Daily Center in downtown Chicago. And you'd be sitting there for 2 hours to be called for 5 minutes. And sometimes your clients would be called downtown and they would have to miss work, and they would, it just was really inefficient and inconvenient.
Do you remember, Katie, I was chatting with somebody about this. Do you remember having to wait for 6 elevators, and then you're the 100th person on the elevator?
And then you'd get in and you're squeezed like a sardine, and you were so close to people that you didn't want to be close to. Oh, it was just the worst. And the Daily Center has a smell. I was saying this to a judge the other day, saying, that smell. And he was like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I go, that file smell, like that that smell, right? Of old files. When COVID occurred, there was obviously a move to Zoom. And I think that was a move, obviously, for obvious reasons, but there was this whole revisiting of access to justice and whether it's going to make sense to have, always these in-court appearances that are for 5 minutes. So there has been, I think, this move to making things more efficient, but there's still problems and there's still inefficiencies, and our judges are burned out. They're overworked. They have so many cases coming through. There's a really big rise of represented litigants. So I think I see litigation as maybe not being considered the best way to resolve cases. And we've already talked about why it's not a good way anyways. But I think from an efficiency standpoint, I can see it becoming, reducing, and finding alternative ways to do it. And then your question of what do I hope never changes? Having people in the industry that can really tell people as it should be. As I alluded to before, family law is so emotional and individual, and you need to have people who can really say it as they see it.
To take all subjectivity out, right? And just have a even keel, objective. Yeah.
That's only, I mean, that's a service we can provide. I just hope that continues, because, you know, sometimes the key to getting through this is just having somebody who can speak honestly to you. And, you know, not from a therapist standpoint, still from a legal standpoint, but have some real hard conversations. So I hope that doesn't change, because I think it's so important for people to have that faith in it, you know, in the system, because it's tough. You know, family law conflict can be very tough. It sometimes is happens for the right reason. Sometimes you need to have somebody in there helping you, but it's tough.
Yeah. Katy, we're going to wrap up. We're going to leave you. You got the last word. What do you want our listeners to know?
Just that I'm here to help. You know, my goal is to help and to just be a voice of reason for people. And at the end of the day, however I can do that, I think it's important to find good representation that mirrors that. And that's really, really important for me to convey to my clients about having high quality, credible, authentic representation who knows what they are doing should never be compromised. Never, ever, ever be compromised.
Yeah. All right. Well, Katy, thank you so much. That's all for today. Big thank you to our guest, Katy Mickelson, equity partner, Bierman. Thanks for joining us and sharing her insights. If today's conversation got you thinking about your own practice, I hope you'll take one idea and put it to work this week. And if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with a colleague who could use it. The 1958 Lawyer is brought to you by Amada. For more than 30 years, Amada has helped law firms of all sizes do more with less, offering flexible office space in the heart of Chicago, virtual office services, live receptionists, phone support, conference rooms, administrative support tailored specifically to attorneys. Whether you're a solo practitioner just starting out as an established firm, looking to right-size your overhead, Amada gives you the infrastructure of a big firm without the big firm price tag. Learn more at amadaoffices.com. Until next time, keep building. Katy, thanks so much for joining us.
It was fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the 1958 Lawyer. If you like the show, tell a friend, and please subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to hear more about Ron, Clinton, or Amada, go to amataoffices.com. That's amataoffices.com. All the links are also in the show notes.